On this episode of the show, I have with me Andy White. He is founder and CEO at ClosingLock. We're going to be talking about his path into entrepreneurship and how ClosingLock actually got off the ground. And we're going to dive into those questions. And we're going to talk about, when you have a solution and not really well known in the marketplace, how do you go tackle that? I think that's a great conversation piece. And we're going to ask him a little bit about how he's seeing the industry shift and how his product's kind of involved in that. Andy, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, Amir, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Before we dive in, tell everyone what ClosingLock does.
Yeah, so we are a software platform in the real estate space for powering and protecting real estate transactions. When I think about a real estate transaction, I typically think of two categories. There's moving money around, so kind of on the prop tech or on the fintech side of the world, getting all the money to the right spot. And then there's also moving data, often sensitive data, around as well. And so kind of on the prop tech side, so we're kind of a combination of prop tech and fintech, moving the data around securely and easily, moving the money around securely and easily. And we work directly with like title companies or attorney offices, anybody who's settling a real estate transaction. They sign up with our platform and they use that to communicate and interact and exchange money with the home buyers, the home sellers, the real estate agents, et cetera.
Fantastic. All right. So this episode, we'll kind of get into the product in a bit, but we're going to talk a little bit about your just journey of how you started the company. And I guess to kind of go back, I and the audience might look you up. Obviously, you have a PhD. You worked for Samsung earlier part in your career. I guess tell us a little bit about getting a PhD, working for Samsung. I think a lot of people probably go, "That's a great combo." How was that experience for you?
I would say I probably wouldn't recommend getting a PhD if you want to be an entrepreneur. I'm not sure it's super helpful for that, but I guess one of the kind of similar characteristics there is I do love to learn, and not just about my PhDs in computer engineering. I love engineering and I love learning about things, but I just love to learn in general. And I think that's a pretty important characteristic for setting out on your own because there's so much stuff to go figure out. And nobody else is going to figure it out for you. You got to go solve it all yourself. And the way to do that is just poke around on the internet and kind of learn how to do things. In fact, when I started ClosingLock, I didn't know a whole lot about building a SaaS application. I had been a computer engineer, so I was kind of at the intersection of hardware and software. I'd done chip design. I'd done kind of machine learning algorithms on graphics processors. That was my background in computer engineering and grad school. I went out to a chip startup in San Diego. We built a cool machine learning ASIC out of grad school, which was a lot of fun, raised a bunch of money. That actually ended up moving me to Austin, where I am now. And once I kind of saw the writing on the wall with that one, I said, hey, I want to kind of do my own thing. I'd always had that bug of like, let's go out and start something and build something. But at the same time, I wasn't necessarily ready for that. I wanted to get some big tech company experience. So I went to Samsung Research. They were kind enough to hire me as employee number 400,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. And, kind of started my journey there with them and got to see a lot of cool, fun things there. And, having the background, the PhD in computer engineering did open up those job opportunities to me that probably wouldn't have existed otherwise. But then once I started getting into my own thing and building the business, I'd say there's been a lot less value from it at that point.
Absolutely. I guess just out of curiosity, you going through getting a PhD, that's an accomplishment in itself. Did you at any point think during that process that being an entrepreneur was on your radar?
Yeah. Actually, so early on in my life, I kind of knew that. There's a funny story on that. My mom reminded me of recently that I got a note sent home with me. I think it was in second grade. My dad was an engineer, electrical engineer. He had graph paper laying around at home all the time. So I would take the graph paper and I'd draw little mazes on it, right? And so I, draw with pen or pencil, build these little mazes on the graph paper. Well, I started taking them to school with me and selling them for 25 cents each to my fellow classmates there. And some of the parents got pretty upset that their kids were spending their lunch money on mazes that I was making rather than buying lunch. So the kids were going home hungry. Obviously, that didn't sit well with the teacher and the principal there. So I got a kind note sent home to my parents saying, hey, please tell Andy he's not allowed to sell anything in class anymore. And so I had a few instances of that kind of growing up. And so I'd always been interested in it. But I also knew right out of college, trying to go start a company, especially trying to raise money, you don't have any experience, it can be pretty tough hill to climb if you've never done that before. And so I chose the route of, well, let me go work at a startup so I can kind of see how that works. And then let me go work at a more established company like Samsung so I can really understand how that works as well. And then you can compare and contrast, and hopefully, you can take things that you learn from each of them. One of my favorite sayings that I like to quote is, a smart person learns from their mistakes. A wise person learns from others' mistakes. And so I try to be wise as much as I can. And by watching other people do it, talking to other people that have done it, that's really how you can learn. And that first startup I was at, unfortunately, it didn't make it. But boy, I learned a whole lot in those few years that I was there, seeing kind of what worked well and what didn't.
Interesting. I guess, going through that experience, a bit of a hustler early on, in your early education. That's a great little story. I appreciate that. I guess if you were to take us to the point in which, I always find it interesting with an entrepreneur of the point at which they go, I think I just came up with an idea, right? Because at the time, it's probably fuzzy. It's probably not clear. When we look back, maybe we can identify some of those things with a little bit more clarity. I guess for you, when it comes to ClosingLock, what did that idea manifest, or how did it come about, or what did you see that where you were like, hey, you know what, this is an interesting problem?
Yeah, I've found I've never been short on ideas, right? There are a lot of ideas. And basically, if you look at any problem or any industry, you'll see a ton of inefficiencies or issues that exist that you can go out and solve. And so I've never really had a shortage on trying to figure out what to do. It was more of having time to do it and then picking one thing and actually really diving deep in it and executing on it. And actually, shortly before I started ClosingLock, I mentioned I was at the startup. Startup wasn't working. I was like, all right, I'm going to leave here. I'm going to go to Samsung. Got the job at Samsung. I was a little bit intellectually bored, I'll say. And it's just a different environment. Like the startup culture was, I was working 60 hours a week and there was a lot to do and wearing a lot of different hats. And then Samsung was more of a traditional job. And, I was in my cube all day and kind of did my work there, but maybe just a little bit intellectually bored in the role that I had there. And so I was spending time outside of work already thinking about different things. I had started looking at making breath mints, right? And so these were going to be, we even had a name for them. They were going to be called sense mints. And they were going to be something that you popped right before you did a podcast interview, or right before you had a job interview, or before a big investor meeting, or a test that you were taking. It'd have some amount of like caffeine in it and sugar or something that, gets all the neurons kind of awakened in your mind there so you can excel at whatever you're about to go do. And I was like, oh, this would be cool. The other name was, we had two names, SenseMints and IntelliMints. And I liked both of them. They were both contenders. I had a press that we had acquired where we could actually press the mints together. I was buying all the ingredients online, putting them together, starting to make these things. That was going to be an interesting road ahead. I was doing it mostly because I was just kind of bored with it. But along that way, my wife came home from work. She was actually the impetus here for ClosingLock. She came home from work as a Keller Williams marketing director and said, hey, one of our home buyers almost lost all their money. And I thought, that's fascinating. Tell me more. As an engineer, I just wanted to kind of understand the problem there. And she said, well, they had gotten an email. It was spoofed. It looked like it was from the title company, but it was actually from a fraudster. And they're about to wire off their life savings to this fraudster. And I thought, man, that's fascinating. We just bought our house a year ago. I wonder what we did for that transaction, because if any of you have been through a home purchase before, you know it's a lot of chaos, and you probably don't remember a lot of the details of it because you're signing 100 pages, you're wiring off your money, and who knows what kind of happens, and hopefully you get your home. So I looked back through our email records and had found an email from our title company that said, hey, here's the escrow account number and routing number that you need to wire your life savings off to. So I drove to Wells Fargo, where we banked at the time. I wired off our life savings, which I think was $20,000, somewhere in that neighborhood, to a random account number I had received in an email. And that was really the light bulb moment for me when my wife told me about, fast forward a year, and my wife says, hey, one of our home buyers almost lost all their money. I thought, oh man, I've got a PhD in computer engineering. I'm not exactly a cyber dummy. I mean, I kind of understand cybersecurity and how these scams typically work. And I thought, I could have lost our life savings. This is a pretty big problem that exists here. Let's start digging into it. And, kind of from there, just started calling title companies and saying, hey, how do you share your wiring instructions? And realized it's all done via email. And I was like, man, once fraudsters really figure this out, this problem's going to explode. And so I put away my drill or my press for creating mints there and started on looking up YouTube videos. I was talking earlier about, I didn't know how to write a SaaS application. I just started watching YouTube videos on, how to build a SaaS application and started piecing it together.
I love it. I mean, the world won't know if those mints would have changed the face of. Just kidding,
Well,
but
funny enough on that, I do have some context. There was a company years later I saw on Shark Tank that does that. I don't remember the name, so I can't give them a plug, unfortunately. But I think they're a super successful company. I see their ads occasionally on social media platforms. So I was like, all right, good for them. Somebody took that concept and actually made something happen. And that gets to the point of the idea is kind of nothing, right? The idea is whatever. You can start with whatever idea. It's actually executing and building on it that's really worth all the money there. So kudos to those guys. They took what I had as a dumb idea also, and they had the same idea, and then they've made it into a big business. So super cool.
absolutely. That's a great point. I agree with you. I think people are very guarded with their ideas. They worry that telling somebody an idea means that somebody's going to go off and do it. I guess when you say that, and maybe this is a good thing, because I guess if people are at jobs and they have ideas and they're afraid to share, they're afraid to talk because they're like, this could be the one others beat me to. The idea itself, the vision that you have in your head, you can articulate it. But the vision of how you plan to deliver that, how you plan to execute that, how you actually plan to bring that to life, that would be different if we lined up 100 closing locks and 100 founders. It would all be different products. I'd assume maybe there's a little bit of overlap, but depending on what problem you value more and whatnot. I guess talk to us a little bit about that, since you've gone through this process and you like to invent, tinker, and build and all these things. When it comes to these ideas, do you think, and you mentioned it's not the idea, but do you think we worry too much about sharing those ideas and just discussing potential solutions and whatnot?
100%. I did. I was talking about the sentiments a minute ago, right?
Yep.
Don't tell anybody that idea. Somebody else might do it. Not realizing that 99.99% of all the work is actually doing it. Probably a few more nines on that as well. Yeah. The 0.001% was like, hey, let's make a mint that does that. And to your point, you can start off with a lot of different people with the exact same idea. It's the execution and the strategy that actually makes it work. And in our case, even with ClosingLock, when we launched, by the time we launched our first product in 2018, there were probably 6 or 7 other software companies, some of which had started, some of which were offshoots of existing companies. They had raised money. We're talking $3-4 million seed rounds going into these businesses that popped up at the same time to solve the same problem. We were bootstrapped at the time, so obviously I was pretty concerned about that and seeing all this competition. And then only looking back, realizing all but one of those companies is gone now, right? And so it's us, and that other company is still around as well. But really just the execution and the strategy of how you build that product, how you get it to life, how you get customers is what actually matters there. The idea or the concept was pretty straightforward. And I had the same problem when I started ClosingLock. I had some developers overseas that I was working with. I was outsourcing some of the work to them. And I was always very guarded, like, oh, they're going to have access to the code base. And like, what if they leak this? What if they want to create a competitive product and start competing with me? And only years later did I realize, look, writing the software is one thing, but going out and acquiring all the customers and having those customers on board and paying us for it, that's where the value is. And that's the difficult part. And I'm sure, I'll look back a few years from now and realize, like, hey, acquiring those first 20 customers wasn't the hard part. Doing this next thing was the hard part. And so I think you just kind of learn that over time, that the idea is cool. And some people do have like a crazy algorithm idea or an invention that nobody else has come up with before. And yeah, you probably want to guard that one pretty tightly. But if it's, hey, I'm going to go solve wire fraud for real estate, or I'm going to make a breath mint that actually, improves your psychological performance, even if it's just psychological and not actually real. If you have those kind of concepts, I think share them with everybody. And you also get a lot of feedback, right? The more you talk about your ideas with people, if you call up a customer and say, hey, I want to build you some software, if you're not willing to tell them what you're doing or why you're doing it, you're too guarded on what you're doing, it's hard to get honest feedback or whatever it is you're doing unless you actually share that with people. Can you receive that feedback on, ways to solve this problem, et cetera?
I love that, and it's interesting. I'm actually going to record an episode with a founder about the idea around. It's not the idea you start with; it's the idea you end with.
It definitely changes. Yeah.
Yeah,
A little amount I knew in 2017 about the problem I was solving relative to now, I mean, that has changed dramatically. So you're exactly right about that.
do you find, and I know we'll get back on track in a second, but I am curious. I just find in my life, and sometimes my wife is like, why are you sharing these details with me? As though she really understands what I'm talking about, regarding whatever problem it be. But I actually find talking about the problem out loud, I find that I'm actually trying to find aspects of the problem or listen to it again or trying to find solutions to it again. So I know we're kind of talking about, unless it's an algorithm, don't share that. I 100% agree with you. But I actually think the more you tell people your idea, your pitch, your business model, you start actually listening back if you have some active listening and you're like, you know what? Did I just say that? Does that make sense? And you kind of reflect on that and you're able to kind of adjust. So I actually do find sometimes, talking through these things, even though we feel like we're, giving away the keys to the gates of the city. But I actually think there's some benefit to what you just were kind of talking about.
The first engineer we hired, who's still on board with us, he's our director of engineering, Caleb. He talked to me one day about the rubber duck solution, which I had never heard of. And the rubber duck solution in engineering, as he taught me, I was surprised I'd never heard of it, given that I was an engineer, was the concept that he has a little rubber duck on his desk. And when he gets to a problem that's difficult, he will explain the problem to the rubber duck. And, some crazy high amount of time, let's call it 80% of the time, he will actually be able to solve it from just talking about it with that rubber duck. So not talking to somebody, just talking to an inanimate object there, gets those neurons firing on how to actually solve it in a way that he was not previously able to uncover. So I find that fascinating. That's exactly what you're talking about there. Just often talking about your ideas and sharing them with people will unlock things that you didn't even realize were there.
Absolutely. I guess we'll fast forward to, we know the company's here, so that's not the aha moment. Obviously, we know you've built the app and you rolled up your sleeves. You mentioned understanding this problem. Obviously, your wife had a discussion with you. You went and looked into this idea. How do we actually get money to these escrow companies? And to be honest with you, when I see these numbers come through, anytime there's an ACH, I'm so paranoid into typing that. I try to copy and paste if I can, because I'm like, at least they've copy and pasted. If not, then I check it like 97,000 times before you hit go. So I completely understand the concept of, and that's not even the fraud outside. That's just user error. But when you're looking at a concept where the industry has so ingrained, they went from fax to emailing this information, or mailing docs before they actually got electronic, where it's so ingrained. How do you go to somebody with a new concept, a new idea, and go, you know what, you're going to help your end users while, I don't know if it benefits the actual escrow company or they're secured from any fraud. I don't know that. You can tell us. But how do you help the industry understand that there is a shift and they could benefit from a newer approach?
Yeah, particularly when we started out, the real estate transactions have been settled in the US long before we existed, and they'll be settled long after we exist as well. So transactions have completed without ClosingLock in that system at some point. But particularly early on, we were selling to title companies, and I was trying to sell a product to just help the home buyer get the money to the escrow account. So there's not a direct tangible benefit to the title company, but that's who I was actually selling to, which can be quite an uphill battle. Combine that with the fact that we're dealing with the most sensitive part of the transaction, the actual money movement, making sure the money gets to the right spot, making sure you get the right account number so you know where to send the money, and then making sure that money actually gets there. So you show up to a title company and you say, hey, I want to handle the most sensitive part of your transaction. By the way, it's just me and my wife that are kind of working on this, and I'm doing it nights and weekends because I still have to pay my Wells Fargo mortgage and with my Samsung paycheck here. So I've got this part-time thing here that I'm doing for you. I want to handle the most sensitive part of your transaction. I know basically nothing about your industry. I don't know any of the lingo or the terms that you're using when you're talking to me about this problem. And you don't have the direct benefit of it. It's actually going to benefit your consumer that you're working with more so than it'll benefit you directly. As you can imagine, that was a pretty tough
That's a great
sale.
pitch. That sounds like a sign on the dotted line.
You want to buy some software? Like, let's do it. And so what my wife and I figured out was, hey, why don't we bring lunch with us to the title company? And we'll go to all the local ones here in Austin and just say like, hey, just have a meeting with us. Like, give us an hour of your time. We'll bring lunch. So we're not really encroaching on your stuff, and we'll bring it for your staff as well. So we'd go pick up Chick-fil-A sandwiches or something like that. Show up with 25 Chick-fil-A sandwiches and the fruit trays there. And we would present. I'd bring a little projector with me. I'd show kind of the software and what it looked like and how it's supposed to work and why it would be better than what they're doing. And to your point earlier, email, phone, and fax. Those are the three communication methods that are almost exclusively used for real estate transactions. And yeah, people still use faxes on a regular basis as well. Like on a daily basis, title companies will use faxes for communicating information, typically with a lender, but also with other parties on the transaction. So I'm showing up saying email, phone, and fax is not necessarily a very secure way to be communicating this sensitive information. Use ClosingLock to do it instead. Let's pull wiring instructions out of email. Let's put them in ClosingLock. You'll put them there. We'll lock them in. We'll verify them. And then your home buyers can log in and access that wiring information. And that's how it actually got started. And so getting title companies to sign up with that, with all the challenges I mentioned earlier. So we started going in person and bringing those lunches with us, and we would demo it. And actually, what I thought I was doing was asking for a sale. I would go in trying to sell the product. What I learned later was much, much more valuable by doing those in-person meetings was all the feedback that we got. And so I would present it, but then they would talk to me about why it won't work, or, people are generally kind of nice, so they wouldn't tell you directly why it wouldn't work. But to your point earlier, Amir, about active listening, if you listen to their problems and you kind of understand why those problems exist, then you can start manipulating the product or changing the product to solve those problems in a better way than what maybe I had originally imagined. Because I imagined how this product should work. But then after we went and met with 5 or 6 title companies locally and had lunch with them, and also the great thing about in-person meetings like that is they will tell you so much more than if you hop on a Zoom call or whatever, or even just a phone call and try and talk to them about it. People are typically a little guarded. They don't want to tell you everything that's going on. You miss all the context that is associated with what they're saying. And so by going in person, even though, it cost me $100 per visit or whatever it was that it was costing us, we got so much information. We started learning the terminology. We started learning how these companies talked, how they were organized. I mean, they would tell us, well, usually our escrow manager handles the wiring. And it's like, well, what is an escrow manager? I don't know what that is. Are you the escrow manager? Who do I talk to about that? And so you start learning those things, and then you can show up and start selling at some point. So once you've kind of gotten enough feedback there and information, we were attending the conferences as well and trying to listen. What are other vendors doing? What's going on in the industry? What are people talking about? Started meeting people. And once a customer sees your face a couple of times, so it was one thing, I showed up to their office. They'd never heard of me. They'd never heard of our company. That's fine. They met me. Well, then now I'm at their conference that they're at, and they're like, oh yeah, there's Andy and Abby that we met a month ago. Great to see you guys again. How are things going? And we talk more about the problems they have. And then you do that for enough months, and eventually somebody will say, you know what, I'll take a risk on you here, and I'll sign up with your software. And we're also offering crazy trials like, 90 days, don't pay us, just use the software, and you don't have to worry about paying us, just to get some customers onboarded. And the cool thing too, once you get those first couple, then your conversation changes, because now it's not, let me solve this problem for you. P.S. I don't have any other customers. Nobody else is trusting us to do this. That conversation now changes to, well, here's what my other customers are doing. And here's how my other customers are using our software, even though, it's only 2, that's still a plural. And so here's what our other customers are doing. That adds so much credibility and really makes that sales conversation much smoother.
Interesting. I love the fact that getting into their world and understanding their context and just immersing yourself was how you both probably learned a lot more about what the product should do and how it can evolve, and also building that relationship trust. I do agree, a lot of times we're very Zoom oriented now. I was going to ask you, you started the company back in, before the pandemic, and maybe this
Yeah,
is the point of the question.
2017. Yeah.
2017. Obviously, we've gotten very accustomed to Zoom everything. Maybe pre-pandemic, people were still like, I still like to see somebody in person if we can, right? Do you think if you were to put yourself, fast forward, you were going to start this business post-pandemic with the dynamic of Zoom, do you think you'd alter your approach? Do you think you'd still would try to get on site, get those boots on the ground? Obviously, you'd be fighting a little bit more of, a shift in perceived how meetings should be.
Yeah, 100%. I would do it the exact same way. So I think all business relationships are built on trust, but actually all relationships are built on trust. And the same thing with business, and particularly given the sensitive nature of what we do, we protect people's money. That is sensitive both to the title companies and the home buyers and sellers. And showing up in person is what builds that trust and credibility to solve their problems for them. And so I am certain there are remote companies that work well. I've seen that with other businesses, but given the nature of what we do, I think it's very important to be in person, seeing people, so they trust that you're actually going to take care of their money for them, and then they're willing to pay you for that.
Absolutely. Final question. I'm very curious. I don't ask this of many founders. I think I'm going to actually start asking, as I'm now curious, is when you first started the business, and it's a business you didn't know much about, obviously, it was an idea. You kind of walked us through that, learning and where the products evolved. When you first started as a founder, in early days, right? You just have a kernel of an idea. Do you start thinking about where you'd like to take the company? Do you start establishing goals? Is it a case of don't distract yourself? Because I think it's going back to people who want to be founders, people who want to be entrepreneurs. Sometimes they get too focused on, well, I got a plan for how things are going to be 5 years later, or I got to think, oh, I need a real system here because I gotta be ready when I grow. All these things that are probably noise for actually getting going, that are helpful for distractions as well. I guess when you first started, how did you handle that? And was there an intent? Was there a goal? How did you handle not worrying too much about stuff too far out?
I think it helps if you don't know a ton about the problem going into it, because if you do, you can get caught in those details. In my case, I knew nothing about the industry. I knew very little about how money was moved for real estate transactions. I had a lot of unknowns, but I knew sharing information via email is a bad idea. And then driving to Wells Fargo so I can send a wire transfer, that seems like a big hassle. And why am I doing that as well? Why can't I just do that online? And so I had those two thoughts in my mind from the very beginning. So I had the long-term plan of kind of what we wanted to do. But then short-term, it was like, well, what do I need to get done this week? And we still operate the business today that way. We'll have a roadmap meeting and it's like, well, here's what we're thinking about for next year. I'm like, I don't care about next year. Like, what are we doing this quarter and maybe next quarter? Because things change so much. You learn over time, things evolve, things iterate. And you want to be flexible on that. I think you can waste a whole lot of time getting bogged down in details and solving problems that don't even exist yet, when there are all these things that you can go out there and solve. And same thing with our software. It started, let me just share wiring info with you. That's literally all it does. You can go to our site now and see all the different things we do. And now it's an entire platform for title companies to use. And I certainly didn't start out thinking, I'm going to put all this together and let me plan out what this is going to look like in 5 years. I started out with, let me solve one problem, and then let me listen to my customers, what other problems they have, and then I'll solve that one and the next one and so on. And you just keep building and keep growing.
Love it. I think that's fantastic advice. Andy, I know you got to actually get back to running the business. I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on, sharing.
Awesome.
Absolutely. If somebody wants to reach out to you, what's a good way of touching base with you to ask you a follow-up question or learn more or anything like that?
Yeah, feel free to reach out directly. My email is andy@closinglock.com. So be happy to chat.
There we go. Awesome. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. And that's it for the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think Andy walked us through a lot of different aspects of what it takes to be an entrepreneur. So I love the content. Please share this with somebody else who's thinking about wanting to be a founder or is in an early stage. Andy walked us through ideation all the way through how he tackled gathering and building the product and approaching initial customers. I really can't thank him enough for his time and volunteering all that information to the audience. I appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.